I'm not yet. I don't
No, you're
think.
not.
Let me see. Start video, perhaps. Let's see.
Oh, there you are.
Okay, can you see me?
I see you, Rabbi.
Oh, this is getting better all the time.
Oh, no
Okay,
one's
good.
sitting in there.
I've never done this before. I'm a total dinosaur. So that's great. Okay, so I'm just looking at the thing here. I guess, we're a smallish number, so I don't feel like muting everybody. But perhaps if you mute yourself just to keep out the background noise, that might be necessary. And we'll wait another minute or two to see if anybody else comes in. I see somebody who's labeled C. Who is that?
It's Cheryl. It's Cheryl, Rabbi.
Who is that?
Cheryl. Cheryl Schwartz.
Oh, hi. How are you, Cheryl? Good.
Good, how are you?
Good. Yeah, so you're Cheryl, you're a little bit muffled sounding, so if you can get a little bit closer, that would be great. Anyway, I'm very excited about doing this. It is the first time I've ever done anything like this, and this is one of those cases where if life gives you lemons, then learn how to make lemonade, because it's about time we got onto this online stuff. I just want to mention that tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, I'm going to give a lecture using the same format. I'm going to be giving a lecture on the origins of Christian anti-Semitism. So I think you might find that interesting as well. And since we're all going to be cooped up in our own homes for a couple of weeks and going stir crazy, I figured, might as well provide something else for people to do. I mean, I expect that the birth rate is going to rise dramatically 9 months from now. It's like
Not a renaissance.
Not where we live, though.
Where you live.
That would be a miracle.
Yeah, really. That would be a miracle. That's cute. Okay, so I understand that you can, there is a link to the material that we are actually going to be studying. So if you don't have that in front of you, you can get it on the computer. In the background, you may well hear my dog whining. So we are very literally live right now. So life is going on in our house. So don't be too distracted. Anyway, what we're talking about today is the concept of the chosen people, or the Am Segula. We had, just to reiterate, we had started this discussion last week, and we talked about sort of two contradictory ideas. And one is the idea that we are chosen as a sense of obligation, that we are chosen to do certain kinds of things. And this is not really about sort of bragging about how wonderful we are, but rather recognizing that we're on this mission from God. Quoting the Blues Brothers, of course. The other idea here is in fact this one of glorification. And I'll just quote it. Let's see. Also from the Book of Deuteronomy. God will set you in fame and renown and glory high above all nations that God has made, and that you shall be, as God promised, a holy people. So being set above all nations, that certainly does sound a little bit chauvinistic, jingoistic, superiority complex. Certainly if somebody wanted to look at it that way, it could get nasty. And in fact, what we know from the prophets is that we did look at it that way. We did pride ourselves on that sense of superiority. Let me interrupt for 1 second. I am seeing two notations that say chat, and I'm just bringing those up. Okay, so Kim is sending that link. So if you don't have the text in front of you, you can take a look at that and click on that link, and it'll bring you the text. Thank you, Kim. Kim has been invaluable in helping me to get this whole thing set up. And
you're welcome, Rabbi. And if I can just, if anybody wants to know how to mute themselves, just hover your cursor if you're on a computer over the bottom of the screen, and on the left side you'll see a little microphone, and if you click on that, that will mute you. So
good.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. And then again, repeating what we had talked about last week, So the rabbis developed the idea of a love relationship between God and the Jewish people. And just as love relationships always are weird and mysterious, so too the love between God and Israel is weird and mysterious. There's no justification for it in the sense of us being particularly remarkable, 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. The only thing that made us at all remarkable is our awareness of God and our loyalty, as limited as it was. That it kept us close to God and might have been worthy of God's love, but it's not because of some kind of character aspect that we are something smarter, bigger, stronger, anything like that. It's just we're the ones that fell in love with God, and God fell in love with us, as irrational as that can seem. But besides all of those lovey-dovey relationships, there's another set of relationships as well that are not so positive. And here, the idea is that God at one point held the mountain of Mount Sinai over our heads and say, accept the Torah, or I'm going to drop it on your head. And since there is this tradition of the Mount Sinai being the marriage between God and Israel, where the Torah is the ketubah, you could look at this as a kind of shotgun wedding, whether, we're going to get married to God whether we like it or not. And certainly throughout history, there have been people who look at our tradition and say, do we really need to do this? I mean, is this really what God wants? I mean, it's nice to be the chosen people, but God, why don't you choose somebody else for a change? I think there's a line like that in Fiddler on the Roof even. And certainly for us modern Jews living in the modern era, that has absolutely been almost a dominant aspect of our thought. Why are we doing this? And the sense that we are being forced into our Jewish background. That is, that's a real consideration. Nachmanides introduces, that's the Ramban with an N, he introduces a really fascinating idea, and that is the idea that God is impacted by the way we express our love. In the same way that think about a relationship of a husband and wife, it's not an abstract thing. If one is loving, then that triggers the other one to be loving. If one is not loving, that leads the other one to be not loving. And there can be all kinds of tensions involved there. So Nachmanides is aware of those tensions. And he talks about how if we enhance our relationship, the result of that is that blessings come to the world. If we denigrate that relationship, if we destroy that relationship, then those blessings will be lost from the world. And this is an idea that's then picked up by Yehuda Levi in the Kuzari. And you'll find that on page 134 of the text. And this is where we left off last time. So let me just give a little background about Yehuda Levi, who was absolutely one of the most fascinating figures in Jewish history. He was a great philosopher, and he wrote this book called the Kuzari that talks about the Khazars, which were this group of people that lived around the Black Sea. And historically speaking, there were actually a number of people in the one percenters in the Khazar kingdom that actually did convert to Judaism. This led eventually to this bizarre theory that Jews don't really come from the Middle East, that we're all a bunch of Khazars, which is sort of ridiculous historically speaking. But it is true. There is a kernel of truth that there were Khazars that did convert to Judaism, and there was a legend that the king of the Khazars called in a rabbi, a priest, Roman Catholic priest, and an imam to discuss their various religions. And it was as a result of that discussion that he chose to become Jewish. And that Yehuda Levi, in his book, The Kuzari, gives his take on what that debate would have looked like. And one of the things and this is a debate that is around the year 1100. So at a time when the Jewish people were obviously hardly dominant in any way. They were, they've been overwhelmed by Christianity and overwhelmed by Islam in the Middle East. And so in that discussion, to say that, oh, we're the chosen people sounded really weird. And, the king picks up on that. And how could you be the chosen people when you are, the least powerful of these three religious nations? So if you look at what Yehuda Halevi says, he goes, writing in 11th century Spain, Halevi advances the idea that the people of Israel are the heart of the nations. When they are sick or suffer, all peoples are sick and suffer. They are an Am Segulah, where Segulah here doesn't just mean treasured, but it means distinctive. They are a people distinguished from other people by godly qualities, which makes them, so to speak, an angelic caste. Each of them is permeated by the divine essence, with the result that the human soul becomes divine. It is detached from material senses and joins the highest world, where it enjoys a vision of the divine light and hears the divine speech. So see what he's doing here. He's looking at our bad material situation and saying that's the proof of our higher spiritual situation. The reason our material situation is not so wonderful is because that's not what our focus is. Our focus, as the focus of all of humanity should be, it should be on enhancing our relationship with God. And the fact that we have left the material behind to some extent just goes to show how much closer we have become to God. And that he is paralleling Nachmanides' idea that when we we are sick or suffer, the world is sick and suffer. So you can see how there's this microcosm, macrocosm thing. Just like Nachmanides says, when the individual Jew has an enhanced relationship with God, that brings blessings to the world. When an individual Jew gives up that relationship or damages that relation, that brings curses to the world, or at least shuts off the flow of blessings. So too, here, Yehuda Halevi is saying, when it goes well for Jews, this little people on earth, that's a positive thing for the rest of the world. When it does not go well for us, that really sort of undercuts the world, it destroys the world. For Halevi, I'm continuing now in the text, being a part of this treasured people is to sense God's influence and to be shaped by it. Living within the divine light brings wisdom and sensitivity, justice and love to the human heart. Hearing the divine speech within one's mind opens the ways to doing God's will by fulfilling the commandments of the Torah. So here, he's doing something really interesting. He's taking this concept of the chosen people, which we usually would look at as sort of a national kind of a thing, and really focuses in on the individual spiritual development. That by recognizing that you are chosen, that attunes your ear to hearing the word of God. It's like I'm trying to train a dog now. You can have 50 people saying to their dog, sit. If it's not your voice, the dog is not going to react to it. When it's your voice, he knows. So, or in my case, she knows. So here, the important thing is that because we are chosen, we can, if we do our jobs right, we can hear the voice of God shaping us, making us into angelic beings. All right, Halevi's view of being a part of a treasured people does not promise a life after death in pleasant and beautiful gardens, which, by the way, was a big thing for both Christianity and Islam, but instead a life among angels on earth. The Jewish people are the heart of the nations. What they do, how they carry out the commandments of Torah, has consequences not only for them, but for the entire human family. And this brings me to point out the incredibly audacious idea, the almost bizarre idea that we as a people could matter that much that we could be considered chosen. Nobody else does this. I once had lunch with Aleph Beit Yoshua, one of the great Israeli writers, and he said, all people are different, but Jews insist on being differently different. Okay, everybody, they eat what they eat. The Italians have 7 kinds of fish on Christmas, and the Eskimos eat blubber, and people in Myanmar do whatever people in Myanmar do. I don't know what it is, but everybody, so everybody's different. Right? We, though, insist that we're not just different, we're differently different. Why are we differently different? Because besides our own, gefilte fish and other mishigas, besides all of that, we have a world mission. We are supposed to shape the world. We have this idea that some little Jewish kid is actually the Messiah that's going to change everything. Right? Which, if you think about it as a, sight unseen, that's a pretty loony idea. But we absolutely believe that. So this difference that we have is related to our being the chosen people, because we are chosen to bring this angelic character to humanity. And I'd like you just to pull the camera back for a minute and leave medieval theology and come to the 20th and 21st century. And I think a really good case could be made for the way the Jews have shaped the 21st century for the better. All right. When I think about the accomplishments of humanity, I'll put Jews way up there in terms of what we have done and how we have shaped the world. When you think about the New York Times bestseller list, all right, somebody described it as a bunch of books written by Jews and read by Jews. We shape that. It's a natural part of our, and we assume it to be that way. When you look at the Jewish Nobel Prize winners, if you don't have, think about it. Are you not disappointed when somebody who's not Jewish wins a Nobel Prize? It's like, what are you doing? Why are you taking my prize away? It's just assumed. With my father, may he rest in peace, it was like the Jewish national sport. Every year he would sit me down and go over the list with me and say, this one is ours, and this one is ours, and that one is ours. All right. By the way, just parenthetically, I just read that the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for mathematics was just won by 2 Jewish math professors, one at the Hebrew University. And we consider that to be normal. Just to give you a cute idea of how normal it is, when in Sweden, when they give out the Nobel Prize, so they give them out in Stockholm, every year they have a special kiddush at the shul in Stockholm to honor the Jewish Nobel Prize winners. All right, and it's a planned-in event. They just know that they're going to be some Jewish Nobel Prize winners. So it's on their yearly calendar, the Nobel Kiddush, because it's just obvious that we're going to do that. So as crazy as Halevi's ideas may sound, they are real. It really is this way. And this was picked up by Martin Buber, who is arguably the most famous theologian, certainly the most famous Jewish theologian of the first half of the 20th century. And he incorporates this idea into Zionism in a really interesting way. And what he points out is that tendency that I described in Deuteronomy to talk about how you are going to be, let me get the quote, fame and renown and glory and high above all the nations that God has made, Buber points out how that was used perversely back in the time of the prophets, where people had this attitude that because we are the chosen people, we're basically invincible. We don't really have to follow God's law. We're not going to suffer any kind of punishment because God loves us. And he said we're going to be high and mighty, and having thereby disastrous consequences. Is that me?
Thank you.
Okay. The prophets, Buber continues, this is at the bottom of 134. The prophets formulated that task and never ceased uttering their warning. If you boast of being chosen, hi Dave. If you're both, if you
Hi,
boast,
Rabbi.
Yeah. Dave, you got some kind of echo going on there that's really serious.
Yeah, wait a minute, we're getting rid of it.
Okay.
How are you, Rabbi?
Thank God, Dave. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Good, wonderful.
We're not the most technologically oriented people in America here.
Join the club.
So it took a little while. My wife's doing something with her phone to eliminate that beeping. So
Yeah.
Go ahead. Just continue. Go ahead.
Muting should be fine. Okay. So Buber goes on to say, if you boast of being chosen instead of living up to it, if you turn election, the act of God choosing, into a static object instead of obeying it as a command, you will forfeit it. And this is a really, really important insight that has tremendous ramifications for our current ongoing, Zionist discussion today. All right. If you boast about it instead of living up to it, if you turn it into a static object, a matter of status, look at me, I'm chosen, as opposed to obeying it, you will forfeit it. And Buber applies this to Zionism. And he says that the whole point of the Zionist enterprise is not only to create a state for Jews, a state like any other. The point of Zionism is to make a state that is worthy of the Jewish mission to be a chosen people, a treasured people. And that if Zionism does not live up to that, then I'm not sure if he uses these words, but we don't deserve a state and we won't be able to keep the state. There is the classic line, we repeat it every Shabbos as we take the Torah out, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, udvar Adonai miYerushalayim, because Torah comes from Zion and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And if we, among other things, our relationship to the Palestinians or to the Arabs, if we are profoundly immoral in our relationship, we are betraying what we are supposed to be. We are betraying, in Buber's mind, the whole purpose of the state, and it will have disastrous consequences. Now, I would mention that there is something of a counter-argument to Buber from Emil Fackenheim, another great Jewish theologian, who says after the Holocaust, you can no longer describe Jewish survival as mere, as in the expression mere survival. Buber would say mere Jewish survival is not enough, but that's really reflecting a pre-Holocaust perception. A Holocaust perception would say after what we just went through, just to be able to survive as Jews is already a miracle. And if Israel facilitates that, that's no small thing. And in a sense, we're a little bit caught between those two worlds. If you ever go into the blogosphere, the Zionist blogosphere, you will find some people who are very judicious and very moral, and in their comments about the Palestinians and the Arabs will talk about, well, yes, it's a bitter conflict, and yes, there are people out there trying to kill us, but we nevertheless have to hold to certain kinds of standards, and we have to, we have to be true to ourselves, et cetera, et cetera. And you will find other people who are just animals in the way they describe things. I mean, just, sort of murderous, racist, kill them all, let God sort them out people. You even see tensions like this played out about a year ago. There was an Israeli soldier, the last name was Azaria. There had been a Palestinian terrorist attack. There were 2 wounded Palestinian terrorists lying on the ground, disarmed, and and this Israeli soldier, named last name Azaria, went up and shot one of them in the head and killed him.
Yeah.
Right. And he was then immediately brought up on charges by the Israeli army. And to a lot of our great disappointment, there were a whole bunch of people that were protesting against that, saying, hey, you know, he killed a terrorist. What are you going after our guy for? He's our boy. And they did not, you know, all of the questions like laws of war, all that stuff went right out the window. And people were saying, oh, no, well, you know, he's our guy and we have a right to do this. Even though by virtually any standard of military justice, what he did was blatantly illegal. It was an act of murder. And, you know, and substituting, yeah, but he's our guy. I understand the temptation to do that, but it really is a betrayal of what we're supposed to be about. You know, we are supposed to be better than that. And Buber is saying, you know, if you are not better than that, then you're going to pay a price for it because Israel will become unsustainable. And not only because, oh, the Europeans will cut off aid or something like that. It's that Israeli society itself will find itself being blown apart by those kinds of moral and immoral tensions. Okay. Before we go on to Mordecai Kaplan, who has a very, very different take on all of this. I mean, Mordecai Kaplan has a very different take on everything. But before we go on to Mordecai Kaplan, anybody have any questions or comments on what we've talked about so far? I believe everybody can talk if they'd like to. Let's see. Yeah, I believe everybody's unmuted, so.
Sorry, my dog is barking, but Alan, if you're trying to talk, you're still muted. And I think, I'm not sure who C is, but C is muted too. You can tell if you look at the participants, the mic has a red line going through it.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, I know how to use Zoom.
Okay.
Oh, look at that.
I'm on mute. I didn't have any comments, but
Okay. Anybody? Okay. So now, Alan, for some reason, I'm not seeing you on my participant list here. Oh, there you are. Okay. I said corrected. Okay, good.
you may have to widen your screen a little bit.
I see Alan.
Okay, good.
You,
Yeah,
you,
no,
actually, you,
I
actually
see you
see
now.
you actually see a screensaver of me, not really me.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's me.
There you are. Okay. Okay. So now we're going to talk about Mordecai Kaplan. Mordecai Kaplan was a conservative rabbi, trained as a conservative rabbi, taught for many years at JTS, the conservative seminary, but he founded the Reconstructionist movement. And let me just say a few words very briefly about the Reconstructionist movement, because it is a very odd movement in the following sense. I mean, all Jewish movements are odd, but his is oddly odd. And the reason why is that it is by far the smallest of the movements. It never really caught on institutionally. In other words, there are not many Reconstructionist synagogues. There aren't all that many Reconstructionist rabbis. There are probably maybe 3% of American Jews describe themselves as Reconstructionist or participate in a Reconstructionist synagogue. But oddly enough, the ideas of the Reconstructionist movement are probably the most broadly shared ideas in American Judaism. Okay. And I'll mention two examples of that. One is the idea of the Jewish Community Center. The idea of the Jewish Community Center was invented by Mordecai Kaplan. And what he felt was that the classic phrase is Judaism is a civilization, and it includes all kinds of different things, cooking and dancing and art and, among other things, religion and literature and languages and so forth. And what you need to have is that you need to have an institution that is prepared to embrace the totality of Jewish life. So his idea was, if you think about a JCC, with a swimming pool and a gym and so forth, that you would have this institution that was the center of the Jewish community. That's why they call it the Jewish Community Center, but with the synagogue built into it, because that too is an aspect of Jewish life. It's not the aspect of Jewish life, it's an aspect of Jewish life, and it should be part of the Jewish Community Center. That's why you have a lot of places like Marlborough and here and in our shul, where we title ourselves the JCC of North and South Brunswick. All right. You know, there are some of the legal documents for B'nai Tikva that have written on the JCC of North and South Brunswick. Marlborough Jewish Center is not just I forget the name, it's B'nai Shalom, I forget the Hebrew name. It is also the Marlborough Jewish Center. So that was an idea that Kaplan came up with that was a dominant idea in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. That's number one. Number two, the other idea that he came up with is that he shifted away from the idea of a commanding personal God giving us mitzvot to the idea of, quote, the folkways of the Jewish people, unquote. And he thereby facilitated Jews who are themselves atheist or agnostic, or Jews that even if they're believing in God, they really don't believe in a commanding God who says, don't eat shrimp. He gave them a way to continue to associate with Judaism that made sense to them. That, you know, we keep kosher, we do something on Shabbat because these are sort of the customs of the Jewish people. It's what we do as Jews. You know, Eskimos don't do what we do it. And it's not because a commanding personal God told us what to do. It's that this is what has evolved as what the Jewish people do. The third thing I'll mention is that he does not see a personal God like the, you know, the old man with the white beard sitting in the big throne up in the sky with, you know, a whole bunch of, you know, babies with no tush flying around him. What he sees instead is that there is a force in the universe that makes for salvation. That's the way he describes it. It's you know, vaguely similar to Martin Buber saying the moral arc of the universe bends slowly, but it bends towards justice. And so it's this entirely impersonal thing, which really sort of fits the rational mood of the 20th century. It sort of, to my mind, overestimates the rational mood of the 20th century, but it sort of moves in that direction. So with that as an introduction, one of the things that he does is strongly undercut the concept of the chosen people. He denies it. And if you look on page 135, on the left-hand side, halfway down the page, differing with Buber and most of the interpreters on the meaning of Israel as an Am Segulah, is the creator of the modern Reconstructionist movement, Rabbi Mordechai M. Kaplan. For Kaplan, the concept of being chosen grows out of four entirely unwanted assumptions. First, that Jews possess hereditary traits that make them religiously and ethically superior to others. Second, that Jews were the first to receive these religious and ethical conceptions and ideals. Third, that Jews possess the truest form of religious and ethical ideals. And fourth, that Jews have the historic task of teaching these ideals to the world. Such assumptions, says Kaplan, are unproved. All right. So before I go on from there, let me just say that he's wrong on every one of those four counts. Okay. First of all, nobody has ever claimed that we possess hereditary traits, or if they ever claimed it, it certainly was a denial of what chosenness has always been about within Judaism, a point that was made by the ancient prophets and made as well by Martin Buber. All right. Second, the Jews were in fact the first to receive these. I mean, yes, there are moral codes. You can find moral stuff in the Hammurabi codes and so forth. There's, you know, there are other things, but there was no other people that has survived. You know, you don't have a bunch of Babylonians running around, or the Egyptians that you have nothing to do with pharaonic Egypt. You know, all of those cultures, whatever positive things they had in them, are gone. All right. So it's not that, oh, I'm the first, but although actually we are the first to believe in the one God, but even the broader moral issues, all right? Yes, you can find all kinds of moral documents in other ancient cultures. They're not here to tell us the story. Had it not been for archaeology, we wouldn't know anything at all about any of those other cultures. So in terms of human historical culture, we're it. Okay. Third, that Jews possess the truest form of religious and ethical ideas. I'm not sure if anybody really says that. What we say is we got what we got. I don't go around saying, oh, Christianity is wrong or Islam. Hi, Chad. I don't go around saying Christianity is wrong or Islam is wrong. Frankly, very few of us know enough about Christian or Muslim theology to even make a judgment like that. And I'm not even sure what those words mean. All right. In terms of paganism and, sacrificing your children, yeah, I'm prepared to say that's wrong. But in these other monotheistic religions, I don't see anybody making, and certainly a Jew living in the 1920s, how much did they know about Islam to be able to make any kind of comment about it at all? All right. And fourth, that Jews have the historic task of teaching these ideals to the world. First of all, we've always perceived ourselves as having that task, A. B, we have done it. So, to say, oh, no, that's an unproved assumption, that's a really weird statement to make. So going on from there, Kaplan argues that national traits are more a product of historical circumstances, geographic environment, and social institutions than of heredity. Well, yeah, they are. So what? All right. For Jews to claim sole credit for having, moving on, for Jews to claim sole credit for having given mankind those religious and ethical concepts that holds out the promise of a better world smacks of arrogance. Well, yeah, I suppose it does.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. There's at University of Georgia, they have a sweatshirt that says, we're not conceited, we're just better than you are. If you look at the ideas of world salvation, yeah, they come from us. You have a whole bunch of cultures that say that nothing changes. Karma, Hinduism. You have a whole bunch of cultures that say that the world is basically illusory and there's not really much you can do about it anyway. Buddhism. All right. The religions that say, yeah, we can make the world into the kingdom of God and we have an obligation to change it, that's Judaism. And its sister or daughter religions, Christianity and Islam. Yeah, we really did do that. And we did it uniquely. The idea that God selected Israel to fulfill the mission of making God known to the nations is not central to the Jewish tradition, but is found only in less than a dozen passages in the second part of Isaiah. In this, he is 100% wrong. It's all over the Bible. Later on, it says, scholars have pointed out that the concept is not confined to second Isaiah, but is found throughout the Torah, in other biblical writings, in the Talmud, in the Midrash, all right? Besides Yehuda Halevi, the concept of Am Segula has never been interpreted to mean that the people of Israel considered itself superior to other peoples. All right. So in other words, Kaplan really here is fighting against a straw man of his own creation. That's not what we are about, and it never is what we are about. So saying we don't want to be perceived, or to claim that we are the chosen people, would be an act of arrogance, and so therefore we shouldn't do it. That is a misreading of what being the chosen people has ever been about. It is consistently about obligation, and certainly it's incorporated that way. If you look at the prayer book, and the prayer book is always the best way to figure out what the religion actually says. Because, some guy sitting in a room someplace can write some fancy book, and that's really interesting, right? But the people have the prayer book in their hand. Think about it. people who have never looked at a page of the Gemara, who have hardly looked at a page of Torah, all right? People who don't know anything about Mishnah, don't know anything about Kabbalah, they can quote you passages from the Siddur. Right? That's the book. That's the people's book. This is the insight of Rabbi Louis Finkelstein. That's the people's book. If you want to know what Judaism says, look at the Siddur. And when you look at the Siddur, what you see routinely is that chosenness is linked to Torah. So that the blessing before the Shema talks about, that concludes who chooses his people Israel with love. That the entire prayer is a conversation about how you've given us the Torah to learn and to teach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The other time that chosenness is ever discussed in the Siddur is when you go up to have an aliyah and you say, Asher bachar banu mikol amim, v'natan lanu et haTorah, who has chosen us from all the nations and given us the Torah. And then you read the Torah. Mordecai Kaplan is fighting against, and there's a reason for it that I'll tell you in a second, is fighting against a kind of chauvinism where people pride themselves on their Jewishness, but do so without connection to Torah. And what he is grappling with here is the phenomenon of assimilation in the 20th century America. Let me explain what I mean by that. There was a status system in the Jewish world where the learned were the people that had the highest status. All right, Fiddler on the Roof, what would he do if he's a rich man? He would study all day and come up with great questions to ask the rabbi. Right? That was considered status. And then you come to America, and rabbis were, there was a glut on the market of rabbis, and people were interested in getting ahead economically. And status started to shift to the machers, the big donors, the big organizational people, the presidents of this, that, and the other. And so what was happening is that people who themselves were detached from the Jewish world of Torah were nevertheless acting with the same arrogance as one would expect from people who had the status of Torah. And that Kaplan saw as chauvinistic and very contrary to the American concepts of democracy, where we're all supposed to be sort of together and equal. So just generally speaking, we all should be equal. But to have people who have no business doing it at all, putting on airs and being arrogant because they're Jewish, that drove Kaplan up the wall. And that's why he worked so hard to undercut this concept of chosenness. The Reconstructionists have modified the Aleinu prayer. They've really tried to take out the idea of even the implication that somehow we are right, the other nations are wrong, or I mean that's a misreading of Aleinu, but it's a common misreading of it. Let's see. Let me try to remember the quote. Hu Eloheinu ein od, he is our God, there is no other, was seen by the Reconstructionists as being too almost incendiary, a slap in the face of others. And in fact, there's a Sephardic version of Aleinu that talks about how the other nations pray to emptiness and nonsense. That's not in the Ashkenazic version, but it is in the Sephardic version. So Kaplan's not entirely wrong about the chauvinism that's there, but he's throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Okay, so With all of that as as sort of a survey, I want to go back and I want to look at a couple of the applications of this idea, because some of them are really beautiful. So if you turn back a page where it says dangers and challenges on page 134, and here you have a couple of great modern theologians who are struggling with this in ways that, to my mind, are much more effective than the way Kaplan did it. So the first is from Jacob Pedashowski, a wonderful Reform rabbi. Israel was elected for the purpose of entering into a covenant relationship with the God of the whole world in order to be God's kingdom of priests. Without the Torah and without the commandments, the chosen people ceases to be a meaningful concept and is liable to degenerate into pagan notions of chauvinism and racism. And this, I just want to underscore how important this is, because there are a lot of Jews who will say that, following Torah is really a minimal part of what Judaism is about. The Pew survey came out, if I remember correctly, it was 19%, 19% people that said the essential part of Judaism is following the Torah. That means 81% of Jews think that something else is more important. And that's exactly the danger group for that kind of chauvinism and racism. On the other hand, and I should just mention, you could have easily chauvinism and racism among those who that follow Torah. So I don't ignore that aspect of it either, but they're doing it for a different reason.
Is it more elitism?
I'm sorry?
This is Helene. Hi. Is it more, instead of chauvinistic and racist, maybe it's more of an elitist attitude, which explains our small numbers. Besides the Holocaust, there's 1.5 billion Muslims and almost 1 billion Catholics. So as far as getting the word out, we don't do a very good job of that. I think we keep it among ourselves.
Yes, and that is certainly the case.
I wouldn't call that racist.
No, but that's all right. They're two different things. What Pedashowski is talking about is the people that brag about the superiority of Judaism, but don't do Judaism. All right. What you're referring to, which is another and very important dynamic, is that there has been within Judaism, sometimes because of internal causes and sometimes because of external causes, a reluctance to attempt to proselytize to the outside world. Part of it is a sense of elitism. Part of it is a reflection of the fact that Jews are a people and therefore something of a family, and you don't sort of recruit people to come into your family. Partially it was because of fear of persecution that we weren't allowed to do it, and within both Christianity and Islam, at various times it was considered to be a crime worthy of capital punishment to try and convince a Christian or a Muslim to convert. But there is no question that there is a part of that, an elitism. Another cause is, particularly in the modern period, there is a fear of the outside world, to the point where, for example, in Lakewood, the various yeshivot in Lakewood, or the various schools in Lakewood, sort of are divided by category of those who are from birth and those that have a Baal Tshuva somewhere in the family. So if somebody came from the outside and became Orthodox, even though they had not been Orthodox before, there are schools that will not admit their children into the school.
Really?
Yeah, because the fear of outside influence is too strong. So that unless, the question will be asked, do you continue to have contact with your non-frum family? if you do continue to have contact with your non-frum family, they won't let your kids go to certain schools.
That's shocking.
This is real, because there is what they perceive to be a desperate struggle to stay on the derech, to stay on the right path, and that any kind of infiltration from the outside world, even one as limited as the infiltration of the cultural influences on somebody who had not been religious and now is religious, that infiltration is too much. So there is that fear. But beyond all of that, you are correct, Lean, that there is the sense of we are our own elite group, that this belongs to us, and we don't go outside. We don't go outside, and we don't take in the outside. So that's certainly, it's a definite real consideration. Having said that, though, there's a lot fewer of them than there are of Jews who pride themselves on being Jews, who will make nasty remarks about the Goyim, for example, but who are themselves not living a Jewish life. So it only becomes a kind of ethnic jingoism.
And yet, no matter which side of the spectrum a Jewish person adheres to, I think in the lead up to the Holocaust, it didn't matter what you were Jewish.
Yeah.
You were all part of the same, didn't matter.
Right. And so, yeah, you are absolutely correct. And that is, there's a beautiful story by Danny Siegel, who is a wonderful poet and a great philanthropist. And he talks about how a Jew was standing before the divine court, and God says, "Well, did you keep my Shabbos?" And he says, "No, I didn't keep Shabbos." And he goes, "Well, did you keep kosher?" And he goes, "No, I didn't keep kosher." And he said, "Well, did you study Torah?" And he goes, "No, I didn't study Torah." And so God says, "All right, well, you have no place here." So he starts to walk out, and then he turns around and says, "But I have a can you paskin a shaila? Can you answer a question for me?" And God says, "Oh, a question? Yeah, I love questions." So he says, "Sure, I can answer a question for you." And the Jew looks at him and says, "By Hitler bin ich a Yid, by dir nicht. By Hitler, I was a Jew. By you, no."
Right.
And then Hashem invites him in. So, yeah, we do have to recognize, and it sort of echoes back to what Emil Fackenheim, the philosopher, said about Jewish existence is no longer mere existence. That in the face of that horror, we just have to recognize, hey, if you're in the tribe, you're in the tribe. Every Jewish life matters, et cetera, et cetera. Having said that, though, our internal definition of what we are supposed to be as Jews, are we prepared to give that up simply to respond to the depravity of Hitler? I mean, just because Hitler was prepared to kill all of us doesn't mean that all of us that survive today, get out of jail free, live whatever way you want past, because all Jewish life is precious. All Jewish life is precious because all Jewish life has the potential to carry out the mission. And, the fact that Hitler killed indiscriminately, it would be the ultimate tragedy would be to then turn around and say, because Hitler killed indiscriminately, therefore we should be indiscriminate.
Yes.
Jacob Gladstein, who was a wonderful Yiddish poet, he has this wonderful poem where he talked about at Sinai we received the Torah, and at Lublin we gave it back. It's a very powerful image. It's an image also that's repeated in this wonderful movie that I believe it has come out now, The Song of Names. If you haven't seen The Song of Names, it is definitely one of the best movies about the Holocaust that you will ever see. And it is unique and remarkable film. Keeping a long story short, there is a Jewish character that renounces his Judaism as a result of the Holocaust. Definitely worth seeing. All right, anyway, we're sort of running out of time. Yeah, we only have a couple of minutes. I want to look at these next two quotes. One by Heschel, who's the great theologian of the conservative movement, and the other by Rabbi W. Gunther Plaut, a great Reform scholar. He says, Heschel says, Israel did not discover God. Israel was discovered by God. Judaism is God's quest for man. The Bible is a record of God's approach to Israel. There is no concept of a chosen God, but there is the idea of a chosen people. The idea of a chosen people does not suggest a preference for one people over another. We do not say that we are a superior people. The chosen people means a people approached and chosen by God. The significance of this term is genuine in relation to God rather than in relation to other peoples. It signifies not a quality inherent in the people, but a relationship between the people and God. And here, Heschel is responding directly to Mordecai Kaplan. Understand that this was an ongoing struggle at JTS for decades, that these were the two scholars, the two theologians that were facing off against each other. Mordecai Kaplan, very oriented toward modernity and modern democratic life on the one hand, and Heschel, who is sort of neo-Hasidic, relying on sort of revivifying the concept of mitzvah and bringing spirituality into what would otherwise look like sort of a routine, bureaucratic religion of habits. So here he says that, and if you think about it, have any of you ever looked at anybody non-Jewish and said, well, we are part of the chosen people, or I am one of the chosen? It's just not something we ever do. All right. They do it to us. I mean, I have had people come up to me, particularly evangelical Christians, that will sort of praise me on the grounds that I am one of the chosen. I never talk to people like that. All right. I don't know anybody who ever does talk to people like that. I suppose Lenny Bruce might have a good comedy routine about it.
So, Rabbi, does Heschel ever say to us why we were chosen?
The mission, the very mission that Mordecai Kaplan denies is the mission that Heschel believes in. And if we just read what Mordecai Kaplan denies, you'll see what it is. Let's see. The idea that God selected Israel to fulfill the mission of making God known to the nations. All right, that's our job. And it's our job both in terms of the abstract theological sense, oh, there is one God, but it's also in terms of living our lives in such a way that that the existence of God would become obvious. And maybe I'll stop here with just one last story, and we'll pick it up next time. And that is the concept of Kiddush Hashem, of sanctifying God's name. And we often talk about Kiddush Hashem as like martyrology, people dying for the sake of God. But in fact, the definition of Kiddush Hashem is that you should live your life in such a way that it would cause non-Jews to look at it and say, blessed be the God of Israel who creates this sense of goodness. So the classic story about this involves, if I'm not mistaken, it's Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach. And so he had a donkey. Actually, he wanted to buy a donkey. So he sends his followers with some money to go into the local non-Jewish donkey dealer to buy the donkey. They buy the donkey, they come back, and they find that hidden on the donkey's neck is a precious jewel. Back then you didn't have safety deposit boxes, you hide things where you hide things. So the owner of this donkey had hid this precious jewel on the neck of the donkey. The students start celebrating, and they use the legal that now, he didn't just get the donkey, he got the jewel too. And they use the legal justification that during a time of war, you're basically allowed to steal from the oppressor. So if a Roman soldier loses something, you're not under an obligation to go and give it back to the Roman soldier. And so they figure, well, it's a non-Jew, so we got the whoopee, we got the jewel. Tough luck for him. To which Rabbi Shimon Bar Shetach responds and says, "Do you think we are barbarians?" That's the word he uses, is barbar. You think we're barbarians? That's not what that law is for. That law is to fight off, oppressive soldiers. This is just one of our non-Jewish neighbors. Go and return the precious stone to him, which they do. At which point the donkey dealer says, "Blessed be the God of Israel that creates people like this." All right, that's the mission. That's how we're supposed to be living our lives. And every time a Jew lives up to that, the world is a better place. And every time a Jew does not, the world becomes a worse place. That's what we're chosen for. So guys, we're going to stop here. I want to remind you that tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, tune in, same time, same station, that I'm going to be giving a lecture on the origins of Christian anti-Semitism. Now, especially as we approach Easter time, and it's a big deal. I would love to hear your feedback, probably not the right word to use, but I'd love to hear your feedback about the format that we're using and what, if anything, can be done to sort of improve it.
Yeah, this was good.
This is good?
Yes,
It's very good.
it was wonderful.
Okay, we're happy? All right, good.
It's a great format. It would be good if everyone else was able to activate their video, so we could actually do that in the
I
classroom.
purposely turned mine off. You don't want to see it.
Yeah,
You're lucky we
Alan,
logged
I'll
on.
put a screensaver on mine too, but
I could be in my PJs or something. You don't want to see that.
I agree with you, Kim.
good afternoon.
Well, and once again, I want to thank you, Kim, for the magic worked, and we were able to do this.
Yeah, I'm really happy. I think it went well.
Thank you.
So I do have a serious suggestion, and that is when you send out the weekly email notice, can you put the Zoom link into that email so we can simply click on it to get to this?
It was there, it was buried, but I will set up an email that Merrill can use to make it a little more prominent. And it is also going to be on the website too. So you can go to the class on the website and click there.
I used the link when it came in and got me right in there.
Good, good.
So Kim, let me ask you a question I didn't see. On our website, I'm doing this lecture tomorrow night, Thursday night at 8 o'clock. Is it there? Is the link there as well?
It will be sometime in the next couple of hours.
Okay, great. Okay, so the same system as we use this time, because I will admit I screwed up when I was trying to get on, and then Kim, thank God, was able to steer me correctly. So,
Well, thank you very much.
yeah, it's really worked out.
Okay, Rabbi, don't forget to stop recording, and then that'll be the next test, as I'm going to see if I can grab that recording and post it to the website for other people.
Okay, I'm going to do that now. Take care, everybody.
Stay healthy.
We'll hear and see you tomorrow night, and then again next Wednesday.
Great.
Okay.
Very
Yep,
much.
and don't forget to
Thank you very
close the
much.
meeting for everybody.
Bye-bye.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording, Kim.
Yep.
And do you want to stop cloud recording?
Yes.